The ghost that lives next door is very angry. Most ghosts, though curmudgeony and reclusive, are at least decent enough to keep to themselves for the most part. They only get hostile when their solitude is interrupted. But if people stay out of their haunts, they're otherwise very peaceful beings. But not the ghost that lives next door. The ghost that lives next door wakes me up on average at least once a week, throwing around pieces of furniture, banging on the walls, and shrieking horrifically at the top of his lungs. On a particularly bad week, I'll get barely any sleep at all. And unfortunately, the ghost in the house next to me wouldn't shut up doesn't make for a good excuse for most bosses. I do have a few strategies to try and help me. Sometimes I sleep in the basement where the noise isn't quite as intrusive as it is upstairs, or maybe I'll try to drown it out with white noise. Either way, after about 3 years of having to put up with him, I'm more or less used to it by now. He's only ever really a problem if you go into the house. I'm not stupid enough to mess with a violent spirit, but others, not so much. They just can't help but be curious, I suppose. With all the racket he makes, I guess I can see why they'd feel that way. But if you ask me, he gives plenty of warning. Screaming and breaking things seems like a pretty solid way to tell people you don't want to be disturbed, at least if you ask me. At first I tried to dissuade people from going in, but my words of warning only made them more curious. So eventually I just learned to keep my mouth shut and not get involved. I always know when some meathead decided to check out the house when I come home from work and there's an ambulance parked on the side of the road. If I'm lucky, they'll have already loaded up the body bag into the back. At least once I remember peeking at the scene and seeing a woman's face mangled up pretty bad. The nose dangling between the caved-in eye sockets, blood splattering everything else from the neck up. The really scary part? The medic told me that's far from the worst they've seen from this house. It's terrible, sure, but you can't really blame him. It's not his fault after all. They say violent deaths make violent spirits, and I can't think of a more violent, confusing, and horrifying way to go than his. He was so sweet and cute when he was young. A perfect little angel, really. But chimps get really nasty when they hit adolescence, and his owner just didn't know what to do. What she really should have done was not get a pet chimpanzee at all. Sure, they're adorable when they're just babies, but they get pretty big pretty fast. Why can't people just stick with dogs and cats?